Um, Last week, I said to read. It's always good to read ahead of class. That way, you get a head start. We said, let's read chapter 4, which is what we're talking about today, and that is from page 34. I hope you all read that to about page 38. And this class, this chapter actually is longer than that. It goes all the way to like 42. But for our class today, we just go to 38. Next week, we will really talk about the application of not just this class, but everything we've been talking about. We have not talked about, well, this is how we can actually apply this to your specific situation. That is what we're going to do next week. Okay. So for today, we are really talking about, managing our emotions. The handout that you have, it kind of helps you follow along the PowerPoint. So in order to understand the idea of emotions, we have to understand our makeup as a human being, what some people, theologians would call the nature of man. If you talk to sociologists, they will talk about the makeup of a human being. What is that? What comprises us as a person? Now, this first slide, it has the idea that for Christians, if you go to Hebrews chapter 4, verse 12, actually we read that in one of our classes about the word of God being sharper than any two-edged sword. It says it pierces between bone and marrow, and then it says between intents of the heart, intents of the mind. So we know that that cannot be talking about a literal sword because it doesn't do all that. So from that description, you can see there is the bones, that's talking about the physical body, the heart, that's talking about the soul, and the spirit, which is talking really about the spirit. And that's one of the things that we have to be clear on before we start talking about emotions, because when we start talking about emotions, we have to understand how those emotions impact our lives. I don't know of any human being that I've ever come across that does not have emotions. Some people may struggle with emotions. Some people may be perceived by others as being emotionless, which really does not mean they don't have emotions. It just means they tend to suppress or hide their emotions. So on the diagram that you're looking at, we are spirit, soul, and body. So what does it really look like if you're looking at the brain? You're going to see that. But in this one, you can see that there is, some people can say, well, there's only two circles there. But not really. There are two circles, but they overlap. And the overlap also creates another division or circle. So we can actually see there's three parts instead of two parts. Now, in theology, there are some people called dualists who believe in two-part human being. And those people would only say that man is either material or immaterial. And some people would say, well, man is three-part, meaning they are body, soul, and spirit. And that is the notion that I subscribe to. And my reason for that, one of them, is that Hebrews 4:12 we're talking about. And in the Gospels, Jesus was asked, what shall we do in terms of loving God? And his response was, love thy God with all your heart, with your mind, with all your soul. So you can see there there are three parts being really talked about. So what is the spirit then? So the middle part, which is kind of hard to discern, sometimes you can say, well, it's just an overlap. But the spirit is actually the heart. Now, when doctors talk about the heart, they mean a physical pump that we have in our chest. When the Bible talks about the heart, it's not talking about that at all. It's talking about the center of us, which is the spirit or the heart. Now, the reason why this diagram is the way it is I'm trying to emphasize how difficult it is to quantify or to actually specify what is the spirit, because we don't see it with our minds. And it's also very difficult to study it scientifically. But the others, it's much easier to study that because we can sort of see it. No, we don't see the soul. So what is the soul? The soul is, the word soul actually comes from the Greek word psyche, which means spirit, which means mind. So when people say my soul, it's the same thing as the mind. Now in psychiatry and psychology, we use the word psyche or psychiatry or psychology. It comes from that word. So in the psyche or in the soul, in the mind, we have those different parts of the brain that we have gone over, and we'll be going over them again throughout all these classes. The limbic system, which you see when we start talking about it in the brain itself, the hippocampus, which we know that is the processing center of the brain where memories and thinking and beliefs, that's where we'll find them. Then emotions is also part of the psyche, where what we call the corpus callosum, which we will be able to look at that separately this evening. Then the will, which is the Broca area, which is the part of the brain that directs what we do when we make decisions, when we actually plan to do something, it actually comes from that part. So one of the reasons why in your outline you see I listed spirit first, then soul and body. So the body in terms of brain structure is like the brainstem, which actually literally controls all your major organs, your heart, your kidneys, your liver. And we also know that in the parietal lobe, which we'll actually see in the next slides, is also where we were talking about our sense of your personal space, your sense of identity, who you are, in terms of your difference between you and the person standing next to you, or the person, another person who occupies a different space. And we also know that in that part of the brain, from the sensory motor cortex, which you can remember from our talk last week, this, we called it the perception part of the brain, perceiving outside, perceiving personally, and the last one, which we talked about last week, was perceiving the future aspirations and things like that. So that whole area is all about the physical body. This is why certain disorders that people have, some of them are really psychological, and they have very little to do with the body. Then there are certain conditions that you can actually see the body struggling with them. And that's why it's important to understand the structure of man. When we talk about things like emotions, we'll be talking about things like relationships, we'll be talking about things like behaviors, we'll be talking about things like our spiritual life. All those topics will be based on certain parts of the brain that help manage all those different things. So the main reason for all these classes really is to give us insights and tools that we can understand our individual selves and how to manage certain aspects of our lives as we live in this world. The other reason for it is if we do this well, if we manage our brain well, we reduce the possibility of us having actually a serious mental illness that will take us to either a therapist's office or take us to psychiatry. A lot of us in this field, we wish we focused so much on prevention of mental illness than trying to tackle them. I taught some of these classes at other churches where there is a fully developed curriculum in that church on every one of these topics in mental health. And their goal of doing that is because they realize that mental health is important for all people, not just people in the world. If you follow Facebook, you will see that there is an emphasis, I forget the name of this organization, that is putting out resources for churches to actually open or start a mental health service in their churches. One of the reasons for it is that Christians going back, even in the early church, the church has always been very hesitant to deal with mental illness. Some of the misunderstandings is that if you are a strong Christian and walking with God, you won't have these problems. You know, these problems kind of happen to people who may not be very strong. Well, that is not really, really true. Why? Because mental illness, just like any other illness, is not always a result of somebody doing something. Some people are born with that. There are some people who are born with depression, born with anxiety, or we were talking last week about all the spectrum of Asperger's. There isn't anything people do to have that. They're just born that way. That's why it's important to know how to manage even those things. One of my hopes was that still there may be people who are not here who watch this on the videos, that like for parents, you know, there are some ideas coming from these classes that can help us as parents to be better parents, to help our children develop normally. And whenever it's appropriate for some of those comments, I will throw them in there in our discussion. So, the reason why you see my order there is spirit, soul, and body. Normally, if you read anything about this or hear people talk about it, they usually say body, soul, and spirit. Okay? Because, at least in the Western society, that's the order of importance we have placed on this. The body is number one. The spirit, maybe, the soul, maybe. The spirit, doesn't exist. But the truth is, this order that I put here should be the right order because the spirit is really superior to the soul. And the soul is superior to the body. When I was in college, one of our professors, I think it was a biology class, he told us that, I'm sure some of those numbers may be more accurate now than they were back in the 80s. He said, you know, how much money do you think the human body is worth? You know, and all the students were talking, they're talking about how much money we use on hair, on face, and clothes, and food, all this stuff. He said, no, I mean your body is worth, if we were to take all the materials it takes to make it. And the conclusion from the professor was 98 cents. That is what it would take to make a human body. Then he says, well, how much value can we put on the psyche, on the brain of the person? And of course, we didn't have any answer. And he says, well, if we were to get a computer, make a computer that would simulate what the human psyche does, before we completed we will have a 6-story building cooling system to cool how much we have made by then. But we're not even to where we can actually have the capacity that the human brain or the psyche has. Not too long ago, I was listening on TV. One of the scientists was being asked about some of the computers that they're having, some of these super computers. And the guy said, the problem is that we can never mimic a computer that comes close to the brain. Why? Because the brain does not need, it does this with body temperature without, but the computers would have a lot of cooling power in order to duplicate what the brain is. It's not possible. So he is saying the human brain does all the stuff it does without any problems at all in trying to cool it off. So what does that mean? Well, what that means, though, is that it's very important to understand the richness that our mind has. That it actually, the soul, the psyche, controls the body. For example, people that struggle with addiction, and addiction would be a very physical thing, where they have to have this substance in order for them to feel, to take care of this craving they have. But that shows in the craving, it shows in the body that ingests whatever it is that they're doing. But that's actually being controlled, but that's being run actually by the psyche, by the mind. But the mind is subject to the spirit. Now, for us Christians, we know that when somebody gets saved or born again, whatever words we want to use to describe that process, we know that happens in the spirit. When Jesus was talking to Nicodemus in John chapter 3, Nicodemus really wanted to know, you're talking about being born again. What are you talking about? Are you meaning I have to go back in my mother's womb and be born again? And Jesus answered to Nicodemus and said, no, that's not even possible. I'm not talking about it all. I'm talking about you have to be like a new person, almost like what happens when a baby is born. Except this, we're talking about this happens in the spirit, is the spirit that's born anew. So that's why that first slide is quite important before we jump into talking about the emotions. Now, when
sorry, we're having issues.
okay, so when the slide comes back, it'll catch up to us. But we have to realize in your handout, on the second point, you realize that I say there is the importance of emotions. Emotions are very important. There are certain societies that really don't think emotions are important, and those societies, they play them down, and sometimes they can even penalize their children if they're showing emotions, because emotions, they don't think emotions are good, or they think emotions are not very helpful at all. And I'm here to say that is not true. That's not a correct understanding, because emotions are important. You're going to see when I show you the connection here. But even before then, life as we know it will be so boring, non-eventful, if we don't have emotions. It's kind of like the importance of water in a lot of the things we do. I'm not just talking about drinking water. Can you imagine what life would be like if we don't have water? We can cook. There's so many things we cannot do if we don't have water. That's the same thing with emotions. Without emotions, life will be very, very difficult and uneventful. one of the things that we like emotions for is it's emotions that help us to have compassion for other people. It's emotions that help us to be self-expressive. We express our ourselves through our emotions. I'm sure you know some people who are very expressive, you know, whether they are very happy. Yesterday we were watching the Cowboy game, and I noticed one of the Chargers fans, this Asian lady. I never seen someone who was that demonstrative about how happy she was. I mean, I wish I could show you. I mean, she would hold her head, and she would do her little hands like this, and she would just, I mean, you would think she must have a family member there who is actually playing the game. But here is the emotions, okay? Also, with those emotions, it helps us feel things. It's not okay for us not to feel things. We should be able to feel that. When I was a kid, I was staying with my sister, and one of the things, this is what happens in a lot of third world countries. There is a belief that boys, when they're growing up, they need to sometimes spend time in this society we would call it a dormitory, but it's not a dormitory. It's a house where all the boys sleep there without the parents, just the boys. And so the men of the village would tell you stories and teach you how to hunt, how to do all these things. And after you do this for a long time and you graduate from doing this, then you can really be living with your parents. So I was sleeping in this dormitory, so to speak. And there was a guy who was much, much older than us. And the whole idea is to make you very aware of danger so that you don't sleep like a dead person. So that if something happens, you awake and you run. That was the idea. Well, I think I was maybe 9 years old. And when I slept, I was asleep. So he took a rag, a cloth, and tied it around my ankle, and put paraffin, which is like a gas, a flammable gas, dipped in and tied it around my ankle. And he took a match and lit the cloth. His whole idea was I should feel the warmth, and I should wake up and take it off before it burned me. Well, no, I was fast asleep. I didn't even know. So by the time it's going like, whoa, 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 what shall we do? So they're running around trying to do this. My whole ankle was burned. I still have a huge scar on there. But when I started feeling it, it woke me up. Okay. If you don't have feeling, that thing may have totally destroyed my leg because I didn't have any feelings. So feelings come because of emotions. So emotions are important in that way. So there's a part of the brain that's called the corpus callosum. Now, you know, if the slides don't come back up, you can look in your book. We're talking that on page 35 at the very top, you have a picture there that has the shaded area. That is the corpus callosum. Things to know about that part of the brain. This is where, if our brain is really working the way it should, this should be where the emotions are. And you can see the reason why that is, because you can look at that part, you can see how most of the outer parts of the brain touch that place. There are so many parts, it's very, very central. So emotions need to be distributed, or all the parts of the brain needs to have access to it so that the emotions are being felt throughout the brain. I often talk about that part of the brain, the corpus callosum, as what connects the left hemisphere to the right hemisphere. That's one thing. And we also know that there are about 250 million nerve endings that connect these two parts. Why? Because the brain needs to be connected. It's almost like the internet of the brain, is how I talk about it. Why? Because those emotions need to be able to have access to all this brain. So when the emotions are in that place, that allows us to have them in a healthy way, not in ways that we're going to talk about here that are not very, very healthy. So one of the things that happens when emotions are not in that part of the brain, the emotions start getting to, yes, no, I have one. Then emotions start going other places in the brain that they are not supposed to be there, because if they are there, they don't help us. For example, on the same page, page 35, if you look next to what we just talked about is the frontal cortex, the front part of the brain picture. And that is one of the several areas in our brain that emotions don't help if they are in that part of the brain. Why? Because the frontal cortex is meant to help us pay attention, be steady, to be functioning, to be contained, and all this. So what happens when emotions get in the frontal cortex? Emotions now begin to be what tries to tell us the truth. And emotions don't tell us the truth. One of the statements I always make is that emotions are valid. In other words, if someone is feeling something, you can't say, don't feel that way. You validate their feelings, but you have to examine, why they feel this way, what has happened, because sometimes those emotions are based on a very faulty premise. A very good example is, we all do this. You lose something, and you tell somebody, you tell your spouse or your parent, I lost something. And then the person says, you always do this. You lost this, I am not going to give you my keys because I know you're going to lose them too. So see, the premise there is, if you lose something, you will always lose things. Well, that's not always true. Okay. But the way it feels is not always the way it is. One of the problems that happens in the front part of the brain when emotions are there is that emotions are fickle. They change. And you cannot base your actions, you cannot base what you decide to do depending on how you feel. A lot of us know that if you know, let's say you are having emotions of being pretty angry. Okay? Chances are you don't want to take the action right away because your angry emotions are going to determine what you do, and most of the time that will not be good. Many years ago, I took my whole company on a dinner cruise on one of the boats on Lake Ray Hubbard. And I said, okay, it's the end of the year, a Christmas party, I'm rewarding everyone for working so hard. So they all came with their spouses. And while we were on the boat, I got a phone call that my sister died back in Zimbabwe, so I had to leave the boat and go home, pack, and go to the airport. So before I left, I was concerned because we had another group there on the boat. They were drinking and carrying out all this. Well, we are a Christian company. My concern was I don't want to have a bad testimony on this boat. So I told the leaders, and I said, okay, whatever you do here, No drinking, getting drunk. Don't mix with those people over there. I just want you to celebrate this. Oh, yeah, yeah, we'll do it. And I left. When I came back, one of my employees, who was an older gentleman, and and it's not bad that he came to my house to tell me that when you left, things didn't go very well at all. And he told on everyone. And I say, what happened? He says, they started ordering alcohol. And they were so tipsy and drunk that some of the girls would go over across the thing and go dance on the tables. I was mortified. And he said, wait till you see your bill. So when I saw the bill, it was very high. Yeah, I was concerned about the bill, but I was mostly concerned about now what are people. We worked primarily with a lot of Christian people, churches. I was just mortified. Now what are they going to think? These people are phonies. So the next morning I was supposed to go to the office and talk to the leaders. I knew I was so angry that if I went there, these emotions were going to get me to decide on something that probably wasn't the best. To tell you where my thoughts were, I'm going to fire everybody. I'm going to fire all of them and start over. Now, if you know some of what I do, there are very few people who would even understand this. I spent time and money training these people. If I fired them, that was going to set me 5 years back. I mean, where was I going to get trained people? So I couldn't do that. That was another option. But I told myself, okay, I am not going there today. I am going to give myself a day to calm down and think instead of just feeling. And sure enough, the second day I didn't go either. I decided I'll go play golf. To me, that's one of the ways that I de-stress. The third day, I had made up my mind what I was going to do. I was going to tell them that I was not impressed with what they did, and I was going to write up the leaders and not everyone under them, because the leaders would have stopped this if they wanted to. So you see, sometimes when you're dealing with emotions, you have to put them down and put on your thinking part of the brain. And that's what we'll be talking about next week, in how to do that. One of the problems, again, with these emotions in the front part of the brain, because this is the part of the brain that directs what we do, we have to stay with objective reality. In other words, we cannot lose our sense of reality. That is not a good thing. You may have heard of people whose sense of reality was lost. And the psychiatrists and psychologists would say, this person have lost their sense of reality. What does that mean? The things they're seeing or thinking, they are not there, they're not real. They are out of touch with the reality. I talked to somebody today who really believed that the way they look is like some of those characters in the Greek mythology. The perfect muscular build, the perfect hair and the eyes. I mean, just like this is, if you were order a perfect person, this would be this. And that's how they saw themselves. Okay. And you want to say, so I do have a mirror in my office. One of my decorators, they put it around mirror there. I use it periodically. I almost wanted to say, I wanted to stand in front of this mirror and see if what you're telling me is what we see here. But the reason why I didn't do that, because that wouldn't matter. Because out of touch of reality, they wouldn't see you in the mirror, they would see what's in their head. So that's one of the reasons why we don't want emotions influencing the areas of reason in our brain. So you may be thinking, so how would I know then that my emotions are in the wrong place? Well, at the back of your handout, there's the last point there, there's a list of what I call the emotional colors. In other words, there's a list of colors that mean when you have one of those colors, or several of them, in the front part of the brain, that means those emotions are in a place where they could interfere with what we're talking about here. But we would cover that when we get to that place. So right now, one of the things that we want to look at is on the next page, which will be page 36. On page 36, we have a part of the brain that we call sensory motor cortex. Okay, sensory motor cortex really is a part of the brain. Again, we talked about last week that is part of that perception, but this one manages mostly our relationships. What does that mean? That part of the brain acts like a gateway to us, to our brain. And anytime we have to interact with everything outside ourselves, this is the part of the brain that does that. So relationships are really how you interact with your world around you. Some people would say, well, I don't relate at all. Well, that's not true. You relate, you may not say anything, but just by your presence, you're saying something. So everyone has that sensory motor cortex. And it's always receiving information and always giving out information. So one of the reasons why we don't like emotions to dominate in this part of the brain is because of some of the reasons that are on your outline. One of them is that emotions tend to make us too sensitive. What does that mean? You have heard of the phrase, don't wear emotions on your sleeve. What does that mean? It means, you just can't be so sensitive to where if someone looks at you and you're already concluding they either think I'm ugly or they don't like me or something like that, will become too sensitive to where it doesn't take much to upset somebody. And when we go through that list at the back of the outline, we will be able to talk about why each one of those colors are not good in these places that we say they shouldn't be. Because we already said the place where they seem to be working better for us is in a well distributed throughout the whole brain through that corpus callosum we were talking about. Sometimes emotions, certain emotions, make people way too needy. Some of these complaints that come in, not just in my office, but in the counselor's offices, is people complaining that somebody is way too dependent, too needy. I have heard phrases such like, oh, boy, this is like the bottomless pit. You can never meet this person's needs. And I've heard some people say, well, one of the phrases that's, I don't mean to pick on ladies, but sometimes they will complain that I don't want to have 5 children, including you, in this house. And that means a husband who seems to be too needy. I've had guys actually complain. I remember years ago, one guy came in literally in tears. And I said, well, what's the problem? He says, well, my wife doesn't love me anymore. And I said, what has happened? He says, this baby. It's all about the baby now. I mean, if I try to talk to her, she doesn't even look at me. She's just going like, hey, baby, baby, all the time. And, well, she won't rub my back. she won't help brush my hair. And I'm going like, you can't do that yourself? Well, that's what those emotions do, you know. And I will specify some of the ones who are to blame for some of those emotions we're talking about here. Sometimes emotions can make us be easily overwhelmed by the smallest things. It would be odd, right, if a grown man who is asked to maybe move a chair, you know, and starts crying like, I cannot move this chair, I just need to leave and go home. Everybody going like, what's happening here? They should not be overwhelmed by this. Okay. On the other side of it, some of these emotions that are very strong, like the anger, sometimes it won't take much at all for somebody to blow up and they're going like, I mean, everybody gets sick once in a while. So why are so, yeah, there's no God, because if he was here, he would not allow me to be this sick. And that this sick might be something as simple as taking aspirin and the headache is gone. Some of the cultures that, like the culture that I come from, you have a lot of misconceptions about so much. One time I was there, now I know that when I go back to Zimbabwe, I usually take many medications, over-the-counter medications, like headache, cold medicines, and all these different medicines I take, because I'm going to find either in my family or neighbors who are sick, and their solution to it is never going to the doctor or taking something like this. They would beginning to say, well, there's a witch that doesn't like me, that's why I'm doing this. So I would say, okay, take this. If they take this, and 30 minutes or so, and their headache is gone away, you would think that they have seen a miracle. They are so excited, they didn't know how this was. You're going like, you don't know? No, I don't know. Why? Because it's a misconception. Those misconceptions, they are born out of these, some of these negative emotions we're talking about here. And people get overwhelmed by small things. So that's one of the problems with these emotions. They can mess up relationships, because some people, I'm sure you've experienced people like this, maybe a friend or somebody, even a sibling sometimes are going like, I mean, they will suck the blood out of you if you allow this person to be there, because they're so needy. Or they're so frustrating because they're arguing over everything that you try to talk with them. It's because they are run by those emotions we're talking about here. Then on the next, I was going to on the next slide, then I realized, no, the slides for today are going to be what's in your book. So again, on page 37, at the very top, we have the brain that's showing the occipital lobe, or what we call the visual cortex. This is where, if emotions are in this part of the brain, they are going to cause what I call insecurity about one's future. Or insecurity about you being a motivated person, or insecurity about if you are going to achieve whatever you want to achieve. The reason being your visual cortex. On the left side of your visual cortex, that's literally what controls our eyes. When you look here, you see this TV. Your eyes are not what's telling you it's a TV set. That part of the brain back there is what's telling you that's where the visual processing happens. Now, on the right side, which is what we're talking about here, it's not about what you see with your external eyes, but it's an inner vision. An inner vision is being able to picture, being able to have intent, being able to have motivation, or being able to have the resilience that it takes to get somewhere you want to get to. Most of us remember when we were kids growing up, teachers would ask you, what do you want to be when you grow up? No, I want to be a teacher or something like that. I mean, I think I went through 5 or 6 different things that were based on what I saw. You know, the first one was I want to be a teacher. Why? Because that's all I saw teachers. I thought it was cool to be a teacher. Then came a policeman, or several policemen in our village, to arrest some of these village men who had gone and stolen things from the neighboring white farms. And the only thing I liked about the policemen was their uniform. I thought it was cool to have. And I said to my dad, I don't want to be a teacher anymore when I grow up. He says, what do you want to be? I said, I want to be a policeman. And my father looked at me and said, no way. I won't have a son who'll be a policeman because police people brutalize our people like that. So I dropped that one. Okay? And the next thing I know is the Salvation Army Seminary had a music band that traveled to all the churches and singing. And they came to our church. I liked their uniform, their trumpets in their music. And I said, I want to be a Salvation Army preacher because I can play those instruments. Well, there were no instruments I could get hold of, so that one flew by. See, but all these things come from that part of the brain. So from that part of the brain, when it's healthy, it gives us, we'll be very secure and confident about what we want to do. Isn't that nice sometimes when you look back and kind of look at where you came from and you say, no, I never thought I could get here. When you are an immigrant, you come to this country, the stories of the immigrants, they're very moving to me when I hear them when they say, I came here, I didn't have anything. Or I came here, I didn't know anything, I didn't speak any English. But now that person is a professor or something like that. Or they were so poor, now they're a millionaire. It's all what happens from that part of the brain that gives them that. So if emotions are in that part of the brain, you can see what happens. It brings insecurity to where the person is no longer having hope that they can do this. I have seen people where when I look at that part of the brain, I know they are saying to themselves, oh, I'm a loser. I don't think I'll get anywhere. And as you know, that kind of attitude actually is a self-fulfilling prophecy sometimes. So, and that's one of the reasons why it's important that emotions are not allowed to go in there and start messing with that. Okay, well, this may be it's 8 o'clock. This is a good time to take our break. Probably what I need to do is just very quickly kind of run through the slide that they, everybody has a book though, so they should be able to have followed through the book. Okay.
Do you want me to go back?
Oh, no, that's fine.
Okay.
That's fine. Okay, so we talked about some hopelessness that can come if certain emotions are in that part of the brain. Like I said before, when we get to this other side of this handout, we are going to go through some of those colors that produce a certain type of emotion and how that kind of emotion plays into the problems we're talking about. And that's when you start looking on your own map to see, well, what do you have there? Okay. So the next point, which is actually the last picture of the brain we have. Mm-hmm. Okay. This is perhaps one of the more intense in terms of emotions in the human brain. I have used descriptions of this area of the brain to depict really what I have found both from the research and also from working with so many people and seeing how that part of the brain really affects so much of what we do, especially if emotions are there. Here in Texas, we do know that we have a National Weather Center in Stephenville. And when I was in college, I don't even know why we were talking about weather forecasting in a Bible college, but I remember us visiting that station, and they were telling us how things work. And what I tended to pay attention to is how do you know that a tornado is coming or bad weather is coming? So their answer was their machines, their computers, do receive information from the satellites in the sky. And that information would tell them about what's in the air, humidity or moisture, wind speed, and what actually it takes to form a tornado. And once it's formed, which direction it's going, how fast it's going, where it's going to touch down. So when they have all that information and get into the center, they know now, and now they start sending messages all along the pathway of that tornado. And us here in North Texas tend to be in the tornado path that goes through southeastern Oklahoma, going through Tennessee, going that way. So every year, if you try to see this, you're going to see, usually that's where the tornadoes go through that. And so when they know this information, my office is in Bedford, and the building that I'm in is the building that actually has the siren on top of it. So when that's going on, it starts wailing, and they tell us you need to go in the basement. And my building is a basement. Many times we've gone in that basement until the tornado goes by. So it's an emergency response system they have. Know the dangers, warn the people, and the people take action to be safe. That's how this part of the brain we're talking about here functions. So you have what we call the olfactory, which is that little thing that sticks out like one of those Bluetooth things you wear on your ears. The olfactory bulb is like a sensor that picks up in the environment, on the outside, any things that tends to pose a danger. Now that danger is not just like the tornado, which is a physical danger. What we're talking about here is mostly emotional threat and what I call perceived threat. A perceived threat is not a real threat, it's just perceived that way. The problem with that, if emotions are in what we're talking about here, those perceptions are going to be skewed, because sometimes they are really based on some past experience that has nothing to do with what's happening right now. If you've ever gone to a therapist, you know that therapists do not lift their hands and hit their clients, no matter what the client does, right? I mean, that's just common knowledge. So one time I'm sitting in my chair, and I had a client in there, and she keeps ducking like this. And I said, "Are you okay?" "No." And I said, "What's wrong?" I said, "Why do you want to hit me? Why do you keep trying to hit me?" And I said, "No, that will never happen here. In fact, I don't hit people at all. I don't understand this." And I thought to myself, okay, let me sit on my hands. I sat on my hands. And she keeps doing this, and I said, "What's wrong?" And I said, "Well, so where are my hands right now?" "They're in front of you." They are not in front of me. I'm sitting on them. So the whole perception, you see, is so skewed now. So that person is really thinking I'm going to hit them because they can see my hands moving when they're not moving at all. A false alarm. Somebody said, you know what PTSD is? Post-traumatic stress disorder. The reason why it's post, it means when it's activated, the trauma itself is long gone, sometimes years. Like some of our service members, they may have been serving in Iraq, maybe for 2 deployments, and they are home now. This is 9 years later. They are still reacting as if they are there. Okay? If those reactions come from this part of the brain, this is part of the brain that causes a lot of PTSD reactions in a lot of people. One of the things that tends to happen there, when there's a perception of there's a wrong thing going on, anger shoots up. And that anger, outburst of anger, sometimes it's just a screaming, sometimes it leads to breaking something, and sometimes it leads to striking somebody, or actually something pretty bad. Or some people, it may be, depending upon what color is there, they may actually hurt themselves. I've seen people who have cut their arms, both of them, from here to here, to where usually they just wear long sleeves so that people don't see what's there. Why? Because when emotions are there, there's no rationality now. There's no calculation. There's no, let's stop, let's look at this to see, is this really what's happening or not? Most of us, because everyone has these parts of the brain, most of us, what happens is there is that perceived threat. Immediately, rational parts of the brain, like what we'll look at after next week, immediately tells that part of the brain that no, that's not true. It's not what you think. What's actually happening is this. When I taught at DBU, when I'm trying to teach this to my students, I try to have examples that really they won't forget. So one day I decided I was going to show them how this part of the brain, when threatened, it loses objectivity because it's trying to survive. So I talked to some of the students, not in my class, and I said, hey, I want you to come into my class through the doors. You know, there's a door that we come in, there's a back door. And I said, I want you to come through the back door and go like, everybody, we want your purses. Or something. Just make them think you're going to rob them. That's it. Okay. So, and I'm sitting there, and I keep looking to see, so I'm acting like I don't know anything. And as soon as they say, everybody, the students got up, ran to the front door, and they go in the hallway and everything else, and I'm sitting there, and afterwards the guys, I said, okay, they didn't touch anything. I just, okay, that's all, you need to leave. So, oh, can we see what happened? I said, I may call you, just go back where you came from, sit over there. So I go in the hall and say, well, I know, it's okay now, it's fine, that's bad guys have left. Now I'm asking questions. How many guys were here? How many guys got in this classroom? Not even one student mentioned the right number. There were only 5. I was having 10, 15, 12. Why? Because that part of the brain was reacted. It's beginning to distort things. And I said, okay, everybody needs to check your purses to make sure that nothing was moved. Well, nothing was taken, but my purse was over there. It wasn't over here. They never touched it. And afterwards, and I said, okay, you don't get mad at me. I was trying to show you how, when trauma happens, that part of the brain distorts things. That's why sometimes people don't remember things correctly, because the whole idea is you were trying to survive. Okay. So that's why when people are threatened, their recollections are not very accurate because of this. Right? So sometimes when some of these emotional colors are there, the reactions that we are going to have won't be reactions that help. You know, we don't want to overreact. We want to respond. We don't want to react. If someone is talking to you and you want to understand what they're saying, if you overreact, that person may stop talking because they realize they're not going anywhere with this because the person is not really thinking. So when I say what colors, what parts of the brain, what colors then would we designate as these are emotional colors, and how do those colors affect all these areas of the brain we're talking about? So let's start with the part that we are talking about right now. Now, no. Because the colors are not on the slide, they're just on your handout. Okay. And some of the handouts that I gave you before, there's one that lists all the colors and the meanings. You can always refer to those for you to know. So what you're wanting to know right now is, okay, so what colors do I find in this part of the brain? Okay. That little skinny thing, what's called the olfactory bulb, when that part of the brain is like an orange color, that's what causes this hyper vigilance, hyper alert. And if orange is there, chances are the emotion that's going to come there is one of anxiety, extreme anxiety, really believing something bad is going to happen. So that part literally tells the other part, which we call the amygdala, where it goes, that little round thing, which is the alarm system of the brain. It goes there and says to the alarm, there is danger. You need to send the message that we are dead or something like that. Okay. So depending upon what color is there, if let's say another orange is at the little part there, then it's going to scream, yes, there is danger. That's not the only thing it does. So the amygdala tells the other part, what we call the hypothalamus, which is the one above there, and the other one to the right that's not colored in. It tells those parts that control certain chemicals that are released in our bloodstream to help us flee or fight. So let's say the whole area there, it's all orange, which I've seen that like that. That's when somebody just loses it. Because if that happens and it spreads to the brainstem, which we're not talking about here, that's when a true panic attack happens. And somebody really thinks they're going to die. They start hyperventilating, and the emergency is called, and the ambulance comes, and they put oxygen on their mouth because they think they're really, really going to die. If in that area, one of the colors is the dark red, not a bright red, a dark red is there, that means there's going to be an overreaction that carries anger and frustration. But the difference is that anger and frustration is based on something that happened, like I heard, that I don't want to say justified, but explains why. Okay? Let's say somebody has been screamed at all the time, and all of a sudden, the information that's coming from the olfactory bulb is people that are screaming at each other outside. And this person starts getting worked up or shaky, whatever. You're going like, wait a minute. Why? There's nothing to do with it's happening over there. Or the reason is because that part, the dark red, is borrowing from what dark red knows what happened maybe many years ago and saying, well, it's going to happen to me now. Okay. The other one there that when it's there is a light blue. A light blue there, light blue is not, none of these are bad colors. They just tell us what's there. A light blue is where we get depression and sadness and things like that, and oversensitivity. The people who actually are so depressed that they really have to go get something for their depression. Usually, the light blue is in this area we're talking about. Pinks, the pinks is the presence of a lot of emotions. And these emotions are not negative at all, they just are. The only problem is that when emotions are in this part of the area, we are reacting out of emotions instead of out of calculation. You moms, particularly, you know when your child comes, they were playing outside, they scrape their knee, and they come in, they're crying like their whole knee is gone. You know, you as a mom, you don't go like, oh my gosh, yeah, your knee is gone. That's not what you do. You do the opposite. You go like, oh, let me see, let me see. You wash it and you realize, you don't say, oh, that's a little thing. You don't say that, we're going to be fine. We're going to take care of this. And the smaller the child is, they can come up with some solution that you know this is a solution. Mom, can you kiss it? If you kiss it, it's going to go away. And you know, moms, it doesn't go away. They just think it's gone away. Because pink, it functions out of emotion. When it's here, it makes it almost impossible for somebody not to have meltdowns. That's what causes meltdowns in people. Another one in that area that is very, not just in this area, but all these areas we're talking about, we're saying we don't want those emotions. Light green is the fear of rejection. Most people who fear rejection is because they have experienced rejection at some point in time. And when the light green is there, that means that emotion of I'm going to be rejected is what's really influencing them. So what that does, it brings a lot of insecurity. It brings a lot of, well, I cannot reach out because I know I'm going to be told no, even though there is no evidence that is going to be a no. Then there's this lime green is one of the one that I found to be very common. People being afraid of being excluded and not being embraced in a group. Usually that happens when, for whatever reason, somebody in the family, they're excluded. And so they conclude that, oh, I'm not acceptable in here. They are isolated. So they find it very difficult to jump into groups of people because they are just so sure that they will be excluded. Why? Because they may have experienced this before. And the same thing with the red violet, which really is a way that it's a longing for being validated, loved, and nurtured. And usually people that haven't experienced that, they live their lives with that longing because they're looking for it. This is what happens sometimes even in companies where somebody is literally breaking their back to please the boss because they think if I please them, then I'm going to be included, then I'm going to be part of this. They want a sense of belonging. A sense of belonging is not a bad thing because we all belong somewhere. But when this emotion is there, there's too much need to belong, too much, where the person, if you don't invite them to do something else, they just conclude that, you know, I'm the worst human being around, and people, nobody actually likes me at all, when really that's not the truth there. So what we take from this is emotions are not bad, but we don't want them in these areas we talk about. We want them in that corpus callosum where they are evenly balanced to where they don't spill over into areas of our brain that we don't need them there. One time I was trying to teach this class to my students again, and but I thought I took one of the ladies and I said, can you come up here with your purse? So she came up with her purse, and I had a Coke from Sonic in one of those silos. And I said, can I store my drink in your purse? And she looked at me, she said, Dr. M, are you are you serious? I said, yeah, can I? He says, no. And I said, why not? He says, your cup is sweating, that's what she said, because there's moisture outside. It ruined everything in my purse. And I said, oh, so we don't store liquids in your purse. I said, that's right, we don't. And I said, where do we store it? Well, it's in some container like this. I said, that's good. I said, that's right. I said, that's what I'm trying to tell you. Emotions have to be stored in certain places in your brain. In certain places, they will ruin it like they ruin your purse. Everybody got it. Okay. So that's one of some of your teachers, you know that helps your students to get what you're teaching them. So for next week, what I want you to do is, this will be a very light class, that it won't be taxing your brain like it did today. And we'll be looking at these two stories and using those two stories in what I help these people do as those things that you can use to make sure you manage your emotions, or you can use those tools to help somebody else, a family member, a friend, to actually do the same thing that these two people did. One of them is a guy and one of them is a lady. So it's even between the sexes. Okay, so we stop here.